Yeah, this relational activism webinar is squarely about co-design. So it's real good territory for us. I know we've got our session later on in August, actually, isn't it, Carmen? What's the date of that one again in August? 15th of August. Yeah, so we've got our session on transforming child protection services using co-production and co-design on the 15th of August. So we're looking forward to running that one again. But this is really exciting because we've got a couple of speakers, one of which is a well-known friend and relational activism collaborator, Becca Dove. And we've also got Silvia Grimaldi as well, who Becca will introduce. And they're going to talk about this really brilliant co-design project that they've been running across the last little while. And I think for us, we really feel co-design is about the relationships, making the difference. It's about surfacing the power, about sharing and holding spaces and trusting people and building capability. And they're the principles and the things that we think about with the projects we're running in relational activism. And you can see those principles and on our website. And I mention those particularly because I think the work that Becca and Silvia and parents have done really is evidencing those principles to the max, and it's going to be really exciting to be on the call and see them unfold the project before us. And yeah, I remember it was an exciting moment when Becca suggested that she could bring the ChangeMakers project to the call today, wasn't it, Rich?
Yeah, this is going to be a really good one, I think, not least because I think Becca is a really kind of inspiring and innovative kind of practitioner, but also because the issue around family support is a really interesting one, because certainly my experience within the child protection context is that family support is relatively, there's no kind of, unlike social work, where social work has a set of qualifications and that you should have before you qualify, and then often post-qualification it often has a structure in terms of what your learning and development should be and how it should be focused. Family support tends to have a looser kind of structure, but there are certain methods and approaches that tend to get used, and it's worth kind of bringing them up to, holding them up to scrutiny to see whether they are the right approaches, whether they are the best approaches, whether they're the most effective approaches. And one of the most effective and potentially powerful ways of doing that is by having a dialogue with the people who are going to be on the receiving end of those services. And so that's what I'm really excited about, hearing about Becca's work and the collaborations that she's done in order to have this type of dialogue with the families.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you want to add, Tim, before we hand it over?
No, let's hand it over and bring Becca in at this juncture. Yeah. Becca, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's really, really good to be here. And I really applaud you both for kind of thinking about co-design and relational activism, not just within the child protection and statutory social work space, but across the life course and across the continuum of support. And I remember having a conversation with Carmen, who's there with you, Tim, some time ago, where we were saying, if you are a family that has come into the child protection system and someone offers you, say, a peer advocate, but you've never experienced anything around advocacy or around peer support in the journey that took you to child protection, which may well have included some sort of journey through a school support system or an early help system or a family support system, whatever words you want to put on it. If you've never experienced it in that continuum, the chances are you're going to be perhaps a little bit wary of peer support and peer advocacy if the only time you've experienced it in that support continuum is right up at that acute end when things are really, really difficult. So I think it's great that we're having this opportunity to think about co-design and embedding co-design across the support continuum, and to try and build that picture of what that looks like across the whole life course and across the whole journey of help that families might go on. Rich, I'm going to ask you to click, because I think I put some really annoying automatic stuff on this. So I'm just going to ask you to click. That's great. Thank you very much. So my name's Becca Dove, and I'm head of service for family early help here in the London Borough of Camden. And I'll introduce you shortly to Professor Silvia Grimaldi, who we were absolutely thrilled to work with alongside on this project from London College of Communication. And Silvia will talk to you later on in the webinar about why that kind of triangle partnership, I'm not sure, could a partnership be a triangle? Anyway, a partnership is now a triangle, between the families with lived experience, the local authority, and the students in the academic setting, why that was just something really quite magical for all of us to all be able to bring something to the table and something different. Rich, I just wanted to check before I start, are you recording this session? Are we on record?
Yeah, Andrew's
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Rich. We can go back to the slides. So for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to give you a bit of a scene setter about what this Family ChangeMakers project in Camden was all about, and the co-design principles that ran throughout it from start to finish. And unfortunately, I was due to have one of the parents who was part of the expert parents group with me today. Unfortunately, her little one isn't very well, so she's with us in spirit, and she's going to watch the recording back. And Tim, it'd maybe be nice if she can perhaps do a little blog or something for the relational activism website, so she can make sure her voice is heard in that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be brilliant. But we thought it might be helpful just to start with, as Rich said, family support and social work. And I'm about to say something a bit controversial, but arguably they diverged as disciplines. And so in the early help space, there's no highly professionalized accredited system within early help, which is a very jelly phrase. It's nice to say, but it's very hard to pin down. But there's nothing, there's no professional status or set of professional capabilities or whatever it might be, and a theoretical base that you learn over the years as you do in social work. That doesn't exist so much in the family support domain. But I was very, very lucky to do a master's in family support at the University of Galway, which reminded me that regardless of the fact that it isn't a very highly professionalized system, or discipline, family support has incredibly strong theoretical underpins, which we took into this piece of work alongside the principles of design justice and co-design. And Rich suggested it might be quite helpful just to frame this session by talking a little bit about what some of those theoretical key learning points were. You'll see from the diagram on the right there, the family support masters, in terms of its theoretical basis, draws on these 5 main theoretical underpins, and you'll see how heavily weighted they are on the social world, from social capital theory, social ecology theory, social support theory, and then perhaps your more traditional resilience theory and attachment theory. These are the theoretical basis on which good family support is predicated. And what that taught me as a master's student, and a mature master's student as that, was some really important things around the importance of people's social worlds. So social support and social infrastructure being integral to families feeling that they can live well, that resilience is through an ecological lens. And there's some great work being done. Tom Constantine, for example, out of the University of Huddersfield, doing some amazing work on pushing back on this narrative as resilience as kind of a pathologized, very psychological, very individual motif, and instead taking Bronfenbrenner's lead and Michael Unger's lead to think about resilience as ecological and moving in all the places and spaces where family life is lived, and about families having access to resources, not about whether I've got internal grit or can pull my bootstraps up. The third thing was that families feeling they can live well is hugely intersectional and systemic, exactly the same as it is when you're working with families in social work. Similarly, exactly the same premise that there's an intersectional and systemic lens that we have to look through in order for families to feel they're living well. But finally, and perhaps most importantly, that this is always context specific. It's context specific to the communities in which families live and are raising their children and have come from, whether that's ancestral, whether that's in their heritage, whether that's having fled from domestic violence in a community that they perhaps love to a community they don't know. All of this resilient social support, social infrastructure is context specific and to families' experience of living in those communities. So my biggest takeaway from my theoretical and my academic studies about family support is that I genuinely cannot apply those theories into practice without thinking, feeling, doing and acting with the community I serve. Because the community that I'm supporting in Camden has similarities and differences to the community that Rich is supporting in Bath and North East Somerset. So it's always context specific and I can't do effective family support from upon high. I'm assuming people will get the slides after this session, but there's a link there to the European Family Support Network that I'm very proud to be a member of, if anyone wanted to do some further reading about some of that theoretical basis for family support. Next slide, please, Rich. And that really sets the scene for Family ChangeMakers, which was a participatory design project that we started in late 2020 was when it first started to come to life. The image you're seeing on the right is the flyer that went out to families on various social media channels, looking to establish an expert parent group with the sole purpose of designing a vision for what good help for families across the support continuum should look like after COVID. The reason the project came about, if I'm genuinely honest, is because people kept asking me what family support and early help was going to look like after the pandemic, because we knew there were storms coming, as indeed there are, the cost of living crisis, the challenges with long COVID, there's real storms that families are being buffeted around in after that enormity of the pandemic period. And people kept saying to me as a head of service, what are you going to do with family help after the pandemic? And the simple answer was, I don't know. I genuinely don't know, because things are changing and moving so much that what I thought early help might be after the pandemic is going to need to be different. So I basically went to parents. I went to the people in the community and said, this is your home and these are your kids, and you know what's going to be important to you after the pandemic and what you're living through now and what's going to be coming on the horizon for you and your families. So an expert parent group was established, and we're going to show you a short film in a moment, which will just kind of give you a really clear kind of flavour around what the project did. And we were incredibly lucky that that we were introduced to Silvia and her cohort of service design master students from University of the Arts London, the London College of Communication, who basically were amazing and said, look, we'd love to work with you on this project. To see what we can do, firstly, to help the students to really connect with the community that they're currently living in, but also to bring this idea of design justice and co-design right into the space of academia, where the students would use this as their curriculum project for a whole term. I mean, I never dreamed for a minute that we would get that lucky to have these incredible students, all 30 of them, working alongside us with parents to bring the parents' vision to life. So it's quite old now. It took place in January to April 2021. And Rich, on the next slide, I think we're going to show a very short film. It was embedded, whether it still is or not is another matter. We're going to show you a very short film about the project.
The reason I wanted to be...
Rich, we've got no picture.
Okay,
it was embedded on the slide, but it might have given you, there we go, that's lovely.
Let's see if we got sound.
Because I felt lockdown.
Can you hear that?
We could, yeah, that's on pause now,
can?
but we could hear it.
Oh, brilliant.
Isolated, kind of bored at home. I felt like I was just for myself. I didn't really feel like I was out there. So I think for me, it was just like, wow, connecting to the community, other parents joining in from different areas of Camden. And I mean, I was just really curious, really interested in like what I'm going to get out of this and what I'm going to learn. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience.
In February 2020, the COVID pandemic arrived in the UK. It changed family life across the country, including here in Camden. As family life changed, so the services and supports that help families might need to change too. What help would families want after COVID? And how should that help feel? In October 2020, Camden Council's Family Early Help Service decided to go straight to the source and work with local families to answer those questions. Camden families know their communities well. They know the strengths that Camden families have. They know the impact COVID is having and the storms that might be coming after it. They are best placed to decide what good help for families should look and feel like. Camden families should have power to influence how local services provide help and support for families after COVID and the decisions that are made about it. Camden Early Help partnered with UAL London College of Communication and the Public Collaboration Lab to create Camden Family ChangeMakers. Family ChangeMakers is a co-design project that brings together Camden parents and family members and service design master students to create a design vision for good help for families after COVID.
The project used 3 guiding principles: deliberative dialogue, participatory design, and design justice. In December 2020, 18 resident family members applied to be in our Family ChangeMakers expert parent group, and they've worked with us ever since. The group comes from 12 Camden wards, represents 11 different ethnicities, and have children ranging from newborn baby to young adult.
In January 2021, the work began. Our expert parent group met online every fortnight for 10 weeks, all amidst the 3rd national COVID lockdown.
Really feel like I was part of something else bigger, and the fact that I could make a change and I could talk to people about any issues that I was having, how to get help.
The first meeting was all about creating safe spaces, building trust, and learning from each other. The group moved at their own pace, and we all listened generously. We talked about what makes Camden special and how much pride the group has for our borough. In meeting 2, we began exploring what we were sensing and noticing about family life in Camden during the pandemic. We built a community tree of life together, a collective narrative practice that helps tell our stories in ways that makes us stronger. The tree showed us the strengths, gifts, and wisdom already in Camden's communities and gave us a foundation to think about good help after COVID.
Next, we explored our stories. Using Camden Lock Bridge as a metaphor, we explored the bridge of good help. We shared stories of times when we sought help, what worked, what could have been better, and what made the difference. Our vision of good family help began to emerge. Throughout this process, the students and parents found creative ways to connect and co-create virtually.
Family are people that love you in every possible way.
As we Chinese people say, a family is a harbor of happiness.
Family is feeling home, where home isn't necessarily a place, but a person or a group of people.
Each week, key insights from the parent sessions were sent to students, which informed their design concepts and brought the parents' vision and voices to life. The students then met one-on-one with the parents to further explore and refine these concepts.
In meeting 4, the expert parent group built upon previous meetings and started to imagine how good help should feel. They used this to create a set of good help and bad help value statements. At the same time, we began to share our work with others through a show and tell led by the parents and students. Building on their value statements, the expert parents then created the principles or building blocks of good help, what good help should be. We used who, what, when, where, how, why storyboard methods to put together our ideas. In our last meeting, the parent group checked in on our final set of values and principles for good family help. We used design justice tools to critique our work to make sure no Camden family was left out. We explored our work's legacy using an empty chair for future generations, and we celebrated our time together around a virtual kitchen table.
A true family affair, the children of the expert parent group used art and words to illustrate someone who helps, what their qualities are, and how it feels when they help you.
Here is the design vision of the ChangeMaker Expert Parents Group. This is their values of how good help should feel, and their principles for what good help should be.
On the 28th of April 2021, parents and students met with leaders and decision makers from across Camden to share their design vision and concepts and to make recommendations for what happens next. The Camden family ChangeMakers story is to be continued.
Project has been a really fun and exciting project to be part of. I really like also you guys, the presenters, the organisers, speakers, really friendly, and you guys also share your stories and also listening to the other parents, their experiences and their stories as well, how Camden life affects them or what they find special in Camden for them. And also it gave me a bit more awareness of Camden facilities around that's available, and that different people use different facilities, and that I can also use those and also suggest those to other people, and also improve my sort of confidence in speaking, even though it's from home, you just get a bit more sense, you can open up a bit more, share your experience, listen to other people, so it gives you a boost as well to yourself. And the main thing is just meeting the other parents as well and listening to their stories is the main thing that I enjoyed the most.
Do you know, whenever I watch that back, I'm just constantly surprised that we managed to do that during a lockdown, which was not expected. When we started the project, we'd not long come out of the second lockdown, and we were due to start in the January of 2021. And 3 days before we were due to start the project, we had to switch completely to online because the whole country went into the third national lockdown. But before I go into the evaluation of the project, so that you can get a flavour of what the parents found to be of most value, I want to just pick up on a couple of things. Firstly, you can probably see in that video that a huge amount of thought and care went into every single session. It was very thoughtfully and sensitively planned out. You can see us using some narrative therapy techniques there in the community tree of life that was built. Another thing that wouldn't come across from that video was none of us knew how to use Miro. So the parents and us as professionals said, why don't we have an after school learning session online. Rich, are you sharing the slides? It's not sharing for us yet, just to say.
Yeah, just getting them out.
Thank you. So all of the parents and all of the professionals came together for this tutorial, and we all brought a drink. Some people had a glass of wine, some people had a cup of tea, and we all learned how to use Miro online, and we were schooled by the two interns that were supporting the project. And it was such a leveler because we just had fun and we just enjoyed ourselves and just came together. And the final thing I'll say just before Rich brings the slides up, so I can just talk you through the evaluation of the project. I'll pick up on something Amina said in that very last section where the credits are rolling, where she said that one of the things that she found of most importance to her was the fact that we all shared. So us as professionals involved, the students involved, I don't think we ever shied away from sharing our stories and showing some vulnerability. And, you know, I connect, to me, as a often frazzled mum of two in that environment, we were all sharing very sort of similar experiences, but there was something about us just coming together and being vulnerable with each other, and much harder to create in an online environment than it is when you're in person. Rich, I think we're having a little bit of problem. Could anyone see the slides? I can't yet, but we can continue on. That's not a problem.
Let me, they're showing up on my side. Let me stop the share.
Becca, while Rich sorts the slides out, I was just looking at that roll call of people you've got there at the end. It's like the credits to a Hollywood movie at the end, isn't it? It was so many. There was so many.
Yeah, go on.
So many. I was going to ask a question off the back of that and ask, with all of those people and moving parts, you know, it's really a big undertaking and a big piece of work. And how did that feel, you know, coordinating all of that and that challenge?
Well, I'd say number one, never ever underestimate the importance of really good project management, which I do not possess. We had an amazing woman called Elaine Crouch, who is business support here in Camden, and I said to her, do you want to come on an adventure? And she said yes. And so much of the logistics and the moving parts is down to the wonderful Elaine Crouch, and also kind of staggering it on. Yeah, we can see the slides now, Rich. Kind of staggering it. You know, the film came at the end, and I suppose the most important bit really was the way that we it was the real open dialogue between the students and the expert parent group. That was of everything we did, that was the most important bit, and making sure that they could come together as often as was humanly possible to so the students could kind of, you know, explore the parents' ideas and kind of, you know, here's some magic to bring it to life. But Silvia will talk more about that in a few minutes.
That's wonderful.
So this will just give you a summary of what's happened since in the now 2 years since the project. It's been used in all sorts of ways. Are we perfect with this yet? No, we are not. Will you experience good help according to those principles everywhere? No, you won't yet. But the point being that we've used it in lots of ways. We use it on a very micro level in early help, so that you know, our whole system designs are based around going always back to these good help principles. What does good help look like? And they're applicable whether you're a social worker in child protection, whether you're an early help family worker, a youth worker, an educational psychologist. Those good help principles are useful for everyone. We've also been very lucky to get quite a lot of national and international coverage with it, and Silvia will give you some examples of that later, and had some real interesting dialogue with national government departments around, you know, really surfacing this work, because it speaks to the power of residents to be able to shape and design what matters to them. Next slide, please, Rich. For the next 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk you through the findings of the evaluation of the project. Now I've told you what it is and how it worked. We also evaluated it. And we wanted to stay really true to these principles of co-design. And so we asked the amazing co-production collective at University College London if they would lead the research projects. But the first thing they said is, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could research alongside some Camden residents? And in Camden, we have community researchers who live, work and raise their families in Camden, but are also trained up in research skills. So the amazing Hafsa and Alice joined the co-production collective research team to make sure that we were staying absolutely true to these co-design principles. The evaluation itself was co-designed and co-delivered by Camden residents. The evaluation ran for quite a long time. We had focus groups and interviews with the expert parent group members, lots of Camden leaders from both inside the council, but importantly from outside in our amazing voluntary sector. And they also talked to frontline staff like me that had been involved, and to the students, to get a sense of what the value of the work was, both for the parents and the family members that had participated, but also for others connected to the work, to try and generate learning to inform future projects, not just in Camden, but elsewhere. And also for me, importantly, I wanted to know what we could have done better. Like, what if I was to do this again, what would I do differently? So it was a really well-structured piece of evaluation work. Next slide, please, Reg. And I'm just going to talk you through some of the findings before I hand over to Silvia. The big pieces of learning, I think this is one of those things that when you're doing a research project, you can look for a very specific outcome, like, did it, reduce the number of children going into care? Or can you take a perhaps more realist evaluation to understand what you learned, how you learned it, who benefited from it, and what would you do differently? And this was very much in the realist evaluation space. And I think the biggest source of pride for all of the parents and family members was what they got out of it personally. So they talked about confidence building. The final presentation that we did online, that was chaired by our council leader, Georgia Gould, we had 120 something people come along to that. And there were some parents that didn't want to take part on the day, but they all came together so that they all sort of wrote the script together so that it was reflective of all of their words. So confidence building, pride in their local community, skills development, the use of IT. We had a dad there who had his daughter there as a translator, and she talked about his English language development being something that he got out of the project that we would never have anticipated before we began. But new connections made, I think, was another big one. Being able to meet with members of your own community that you've never met before, albeit online. And there was something about the mutuality and the mutual aid of doing that during a lockdown when people were feeling very isolated, and that ability to connect. The family relationships one I thought was fascinating, because lockdowns were really hard for families, but they talked a lot about feeling closer to their children and their grandchildren, because about halfway through we thought, we're missing children's voices, so let's get them involved. And so with all of the little tasks that we set for the children each week, the parents would do it with them, and then they'd bring their work along to the meeting. So that enhancement of family relationships. Appreciation of Camden, just, the opportunity to be heard came out very strongly in the data. And also new participation opportunities. I think one of the best things about this project is how many parents went on to gain work as a result of this project, or took on voluntary roles as a pathway to employment, or are now parent champions, absolutely smashing it out of the park, doing peer work and peer support and information roles in other spaces. So there was a huge range of benefits on a real deeply personal level for our parents. Next slide, please, Rich. And there was also, as you would imagine, a lot of learning for the students. I'll let Silvia speak more to this, but again, across the data from the evaluation, there was this sense that the students felt like it really deepened their understanding of policy and co-design, which really added to their own commitment and motivation to the work. And conversely, all of us as Camden staff and the parents really valued the rigor and the insight and the frameworks that the students and the academic world brought to us. So there was a real meeting of minds where everyone was bringing something to the table, and all the moving parts kind of worked together. Next slide, please, Rich. There were inevitably things that we learned that we would do differently next time. So one of them, and I think this was the biggest thing, again, across the data, you can see that quote there from one of the parents saying that there's no victory to me to just be talking about what the outcomes were for me, or to talk about good help. We've shown you what we want. Now it's up to you, the people that can make changes within a system, to do something with it. And although communication was incredibly regular during the project, I think we should have done more communication after the project, so that parents could see all the ways in which their co-design was being taken into spaces and doing something with, and the way on from a micro to a macro level, it was informing the work that was done. This was an interesting one for me, about parents feeling that we should bring senior leaders like your directors and your council leaders into the process earlier. I think the feeling was that we would have, the expert parent group would have really liked the chance to kind of collaborate with them at an earlier stage. So that's some learning for me to take on board. Finally, I mean, participation online is always difficult, and there was nothing we could have done about it, save for postpone the project, and everyone was geared up and ready. But there's always, I think, a tension that participating online is both enabling and disabling, and how you find a balance between that. I think one thing I would say is we ran 2 sessions every fortnight, because some parents preferred the straight after the school run, and some parents preferred the evening, got the children, you know, home, fed, and now I've got an hour and a half before bedtime that I can do something. So we ran 2 sessions every fortnight. And so making sure you're not just kind of sticking rigidly to it's morning or afternoon, you've got to flex with these things to fit in with family life. Next slide, please, Rich. And I'll hand over to Silvia in just a second, but I think the big overarching message was, number one, the co-design process is an outcome of in and of itself. So you might think that the outcome was we've got a vision for good help for families. Actually, there was outcomes that were being achieved consistently and regularly throughout the co-design that when you evaluate this kind of stuff, it's really important to check in with. But secondly, that what you do next matters as much, if not more, than what you did. You know, co-design is great, but where is that continuing on? Where are you doing something with this incredibly rich vision that people have given to you? Next slide, please, Rich. I'm going to hand over to Silvia now to give you the view from the student and an academic side. So Silvia, do you want to just introduce yourself, and then I'll leave you to do next slide, please, with Rich.
Yep, sounds good. So I'm Silvia Grimaldi. I'm a reader in service design and collaborative futures at London College of Communication, which is part of the University of the Arts. At the time of this project, I was the course leader for the MA in service design, and I still teach on that, but I'm primarily now leading the Service Futures Lab, which is also based here at London College of Communication. And what we're interested in is really bridging that gap between what we do with the students, with kind of the communities and the organizations that we work with those students. And one of the things, actually, if you could go back one slide, sorry, Richard. One of the things that we did with the project was that, first of all, it was amazing to work with Becca and with Elaine, because there is such a lot of work that goes out behind the scenes to prepare these projects, to involve, you know, cohorts of 30 students with groups of participants from all sorts of areas of life. And just having that really strong connection with Becca and all of the logistical support that Elaine provided, you know, the parents were provided with laptops and taught how to use them and taught how to use Miro, you know, all of that was really, really essential. But also Becca had come to us with a really strong vision that she wanted to work with co-design and she wanted to work with design justice. And so those were really things that you know, made me really passionate to want to do this project at this moment. And one of the things that's important is that this was part of the curriculum for the master's students in service design. And so really we had to hit certain things, you know, they had to design a service. It was a unit on collaboration and on co-design, so that was really central. But one of the things that we did as outputs was work with the parents to understand what the policy level of this would be. And that was the manifesto and all of the principles. But then the students actually came up with 9 different proposals of actual services that would materialize what that kind of very abstract policy level might look like in practice. So it's kind of like prototyping how you might apply that to the situation and the ecosystem of Camden. Can I have the next slide? And so one of the things that is really important to us when we're teaching service design is that it's really easy for service design to be reduced to a set of tools, a set of processes, and you know, you feel like you're doing service design if you're ticking the boxes that we have done these things. But actually, one of the really big learnings from the students that are doing the course is being able to negotiate these massive ecosystems that are where services exist in real life. So, you know, in this project, we were working with Camden, we were working with 20 ChangeMaker families, we were working with early help, we were working with 32 students on the MA in service design, 11 students on data visualization, 5 tutors with different specialties, you know, multiple local Camden stakeholders, industry experts, etc. And it was the students' job to really negotiate the opinions of all these people from all over the board, and how you then go from, you know, who is your client? Who are you doing this project for? Whose voices are you centering? Who are you listening to? All of the principles of design justice, we could really put them in practice here. How do you make sure that the people that are participating in your project are really the people that you think are important to be in that project? Could I have the next slide? And so, yes, the students prototyped it through kind of different ways of approaching a service. So some of them were around service transformation, some of them were around disruptive design and policy, and some of them were around future services and reimagining what the future might be like. And if you're interested in seeing some of the student projects, which again were prototypes of what these policies might look like in practice, they're all on the website, which I think is in the next slide. If I could have the next slide. And some of the things that the students got out of it were that, for example, they were able to reflect on how they might go forward and work outside in the real world and what spaces there might be. Because usually, you know, if you're a master's student in service design, the route that you think you might be going in is, you know, through service design consultancies, etc. So there are other spaces for service design that might happen in, you know, in government or in third sector or in other areas, and not just strictly through kind of those traditional routes. But also, you know, it was an opportunity for them to collaborate with diverse stakeholders, and also having to keep in mind the needs of many players at the same time, and to navigate that. And really this idea that they can do a project that is real and that it has an impact. And we always focus on the impact being around social value. We don't want our students to be working on projects that don't provide social or ecological value, because we are really mindful of the fact that, you know, the students are doing these projects as part of their education, and they're also, you know, in a sense, we don't want to undercut people within the industry who are working on consultancy projects, etc. We want to do something that actually provides a value that is different from the economic value. And also, you know, the students understanding that they are experts in the service design and in the co-design aspects and in all of those different parts, but the parents are really the experts of the lived experience of that. And then the experts that they're talking to around different parts of the organizations that we worked with are also experts in how those organizations work. And really the students are there to facilitate those dialogue between the different communities. And sorry, the next slide. So this is a kind of an extract from a paper that we are presenting in Brazil as part of the ServDes conference. And there are three case studies within this paper. And we've been wanting to write this paper for a really long time. And it's really about how we work as the Service Futures Lab with different types of projects, but also how we make design justice informed pedagogy of service design. And, you know, there's kind of basics about how we work in this slide. We always focus on social justice, public policy, climate emergency, or public health, but also we are very interested in working in collaborative design, design justice, and also ethical engagement and reflexive research, and working in ways that are, you know, show that reciprocity, so everyone is getting something out of that project. It was amazing to have the evaluation of this project and to see that come to life really afterwards. Could I have the next slide, please? And these are some of the kind of conclusions that we came to in that paper. There's a lot more than this, but really, what are the principles that made us want to do this type of work, and that this project really embedded really well. So understanding the complexity of service design in a real world setting, understanding where the power lies within an ecosystem and what is their role of that, understanding services as complex social technical systems, but also, you know, opportunities to become part of these ecosystems, and understanding how you can cooperate in a responsible way, as well as understanding in what kind of organizational culture those projects will reside in the future. I think that was my last one. Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Silvia. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour, and we've got about 10 minutes or so for any questions or reflections, and you've seen it kind of through multiple lenses. The lens of this was all about community building, something that was going to work for them because they know their families best. It was about a local authority perhaps just having a bit of humility to accept that it doesn't know what's best all of the time. And it needs that incredibly insightful lens from people that are living here, raising their families here to design it. But then the absolute magic that can happen when you bring that wisdom from within the community together with academia, when they can meet in the middle. Because what I never ever got a sense of with this project was any kind of hierarchy between the students and the academia and the parents and the community. There was an absolute leveling of it. But how you run the project will determine whether that's real or whether that's not. So thank you very much, Tim and Rich. We're very happy to stay on and take any questions.
That's fantastic, and I think it's the rigor and the of the work, and the detail is just so phenomenal, and to see it there, the learning for all of us. We have got anybody that wants to put a question, do so in the chat, or put your, is it a little yellow hand on the Zoom? I forget, it is a little yellow hand, isn't it? You put your little yellow hand up. But Crystal made a point earlier, Becca, and I think it was as you were talking about, did you see that comment on the chat? It was when as you were talking about COVID and the impact of COVID, Crystal's made the point, in addition, the issues highlighted around BLM, Black Lives Matter, and yeah, what's your response to that comment?
I mean, she's absolutely right. I mean, the trauma within communities and the healing that needed to come from that, and the justice doing that needed to come from that was absolutely essential, which I think, I mean, for Silvia and I, design justice would have been part of what we wanted to bring to this project regardless. But you know, the intensity and the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, particularly for a place like Camden, you know, there's 156 different languages and dialects that are spoken here. It's an incredibly diverse and beautiful community, and they felt the impact of Black Lives Matter and that movement, that groundswell coming. So I think design justice would have been important to us regardless, but particularly our expert parent group was itself incredibly diverse. But I think one of the big things that I took from that on that slide pack, and I'll stick it over, I think I borrowed it from the Design Justice Network, but there's 6 kind of power related questions to just, when you've done a project, a co-design project, to all come together and just pause and ask yourself, is anyone being left out? Has power just been, have we just perpetuated existing harms within a system, or systemic injustices or systemic racism by what we've decided to do? And what having looked through that lens and taken a pause moment, might we do differently? And some of the things shifted in the Families Manifesto as a result of doing that. So yeah, a big ups for the design justice principles.
I was really struck by the simplicity of that headline there, or the question about have any families been left out? And it's very simple, but cuts straight through to the heart of it, doesn't it? I was also, do you think, talking about the design justice, and for people on the call that are thinking about preparing for, already engaged in participation work, co-design work, that kind of, could we describe it as an ethical framework, those design justice principles? how important is that? And would you recommend those ones particularly, or are there some other ethical frameworks around that would be worth looking at for people?
Well, I think really good co-design these days, and I don't profess to be an expert in co-design, but my gut feel is that if it doesn't include an element of justice seeking or justice doing about it, it's probably on the wrong path. I mean, I particularly like the Design Justice Network set of principles. I've put a link in the chat there, because it kind of gets you away from a engagement perspective, and it looks at it as a justice seeking, justice doing tool. You know, you've had on these webinars before talking about peer advocacy and peer support. If you were to look at that through a participation lens, you'd get one set of views. If you looked at it through a justice lens, you'd get a very different set of views. And I fully accept that Camden is very socially justice weighted, and that's its ethical driver. And I've worked in other local authorities where other things and other ethics are their driver. But I think to bring co-design and design justice together, they're just such a naturally aligned fit, and you can then see it as a justice doing tool rather than a simple kind of participatory engagement type tool, which kind of weakens it. I think perhaps not weakens it, but it lessens its value, lessens its possibilities. But Silvia, what would you say to that through your design justice lens?
Yeah, can I just slip in the next question for you as well, Silvia, about the chair, and how you that way of bringing futures and a conversation about the future into the work. I think often we're thinking about near-term issues, and particularly risk is something which is very permeates our social work and our family work, and it is often a near-term concern. And so bringing the future in, which explains it beautifully. But can you say what you did with the chair? There was a chair you were using, wasn't there, to think about the future? Did you have like? Was that in the slides?
It was in the last slide, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, SOS. Yeah, yeah. If you want to explain.
Yeah, so we drew quite a lot on the Long Time Foundation's work for this. I'll put a link in the chat where they're just encouraging us to take a longer timeline, to be thinking beyond the here and now, and to be thinking about how what we're doing now is going to affect future generations. So again, that's a kind of justice doing lens as well as a kind of future generations lens. But the empty chair for future generations, Neris has put it in the chat, and I'll put a link into it. Had we done it in person, it would have been a literal empty chair, and the empty chair is there to represent a child 30 years from now, 50 years from now, and to just try and visualize what that child might be thinking, feeling, experiencing as a result of the changes that you're making now. And is that child feeling secure? Is that child feeling safe? Is that child feeling, are they thriving? Like, where can you see the impact of what you're doing today for that child into the future? So that was why we did that.
There are other approaches. Well, there are other approaches as well that we use within the more service design aspects, which is to kind of use the future as a substitute for talking about the now. So, you know, if you think of something in a distant future, in a fairly fictional world, it's easier to then pick up the contradictions and the things that are happening right now without having to be put on the spot to say, like, this is what is wrong with this particular thing now. But it really is a way to critique the current situation as well. So, you know, looking at a fictional future as a way to kind of engage with the now. So some of the students' projects have taken that route.
Well, we make a point of finishing on time with these webinars. So we're really grateful for all of you for coming, aren't we, Rich? And we have updated all the timings on the website because we did make a bit of an error in flagging this website up at the wrong time. So we're really grateful for those that managed to traverse the future and come to the webinar and not get the timing wrong. Apologies for that. But yeah, all the other ones on the website, all the times are correct now. And we'd really like to join you at future sessions. You can contact us, you can contact us at the website, or you can contact me at tim.fisher@camden.gov.uk. And we're really so grateful for Becca and for Silvia. It's really rare for us to have that kind of in-depth case study, and to really dive in and immerse ourselves in the detail of that, and with all the learning that comes along. So, and we're really grateful, aren't we, Rich?
Super grateful, and I'm sure that they'll be more than happy for you to reach out if you feel kind of inspired to take on your own version of this. This is exactly, when I heard about this, we were inspired in Baines, and we connected with our university, and that led us down a really interesting path. And if it wasn't for Becca, providing us support and a helping hand during that, we wouldn't have been able to get there. So yeah, please do reach out for them if you're struck by their ideas and some of the principles, because I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help. But yeah, thank you, Becca and Silvia. That was, yeah, magical. Really, really interesting, rigorous exploration of co-design in practice.
And Becca and Silvia have put their emails in the chat, so you can get in contact with them direct, which is brilliant. Yeah. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us. Always nice to see you, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.